I think it is safe to say that the court system has not walked hand in hand with technology towards the future. We have had e-filing for about 3 decades. Fortunately, for those who need it, unrepresented litigants, we do have online legal aid. But it's really been the private sector that has paved the way in terms of innovations in technology for courts. In fact, these days we have companies that are offering virtual reality presentations for attorneys to show to jurors, where the jurors will don the goggles and they can actually walk to the accident scene, walk around, see where the yield sign was, see where the car ended up, and look at the damage to the car. We've even gone as far as some private companies offering us virtual mock trials where attorneys can try out their case with mock jurors who are sitting at home and then giving a verdict after they hear the version of the attorney's case. But in the court system, we've basically done this progression: in person only, then conference calls for things like motions. We have allowed, and it's prevalent these days, video depositions. And we've gone to, in some cases, remote hearings on bonds and arraignments. And in 10 or 20 or 30 years, perhaps we will have remote trials where we won't be in a courtroom. We won't have a wooden bench in front of us or a wooden jury rail in front of us, but we will all be in our homes or our offices trying the case to the jurors who are in their homes. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has made us accelerate in our turn to technology. I have been receiving many emails and I've been on many webinars this week with court systems that are urging the lower courts to all turn to technology. Most have, of course, telephone conference ability, but they're urging them to go to video conference ability so that instead of being in court, which is certainly a danger these days, that you can be the next best thing to being there, and that is to be in court through technology. And the purpose of this program is for us to give you all the tools that we know so that you can be a better advocate, although you're not in court, but through the computer screen. The first thing I want to share with you, is this out of an article I read, I believe back in 2003. In one instance, a simple change from an equal focus confession to a suspect focus confession doubled the conviction rate. This is in an article entitled "Video Cameras Too Can Lie or at least Create Jury Prejudice." And if you would like to read the entire article, there's the site for you. The setup for this was that they had jurors watching a mock trial, and one aspect of the trial was a videotape confession. They had 2 cameras filming the confession, so the jurors could see exactly the same confession, but some jurors saw it from one aspect and the others saw it from another aspect. And the difference between the two is one set of jurors saw it with just the suspect's face in the frame. The other group saw both the suspect and the questioner in the frame. And the jurors who saw just the suspect in the frame, the conviction rate was double. How people view the information affects that information. It's my understanding that in all the Law and Order and CSI shows, it's set with or filmed with a 3-camera setup. There is a camera on top, which looks down at the scene, a camera in the middle, which looks straight on, and a camera from below that looks up. And the director can then choose what impression he wants the audience to have, he or she wants the audience to have, based upon the camera angle. From below, the person looks more menacing. Straight on is neutral. And from above, there is a sense of innocence. It can also apply to writings. One of the deans of making quantitative evidence visual is Edward Tufte. His first groundbreaking book was The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. His last book is called Beautiful Evidence, and in it, he talks about the Columbia disaster and talks about how PowerPoint was a failure in terms of communicating information to the engineers who had to decide whether the foam coming off the capsule damaged the wing or not, whether it was safe to bring them back. The presentations were all done in PowerPoint. And if you read Tufte's book and if you read the report after the disaster, the mode of communication was criticized. Why? Because the force calculations were in small font down at the bottom. In addition, in that mode of communication, you cannot do scientific notation. So the engineers were seeing the calculations in a way that they were not used to seeing it. And the report says the way they were delivered that information helped contribute to the wrong decision that this would not be a concern.
Thank you, Mark. As we teach NITA courses across the country and around the world, we do something called video review. And it's the opportunity for the advocates to record their arguments, their examinations on their phones or some other device, bring them into a faculty member so that they have an opportunity to look at them. There's almost a universal theme in video review, and that is people telling us that they don't like the way they look on camera or they don't like the way they sound on camera. Well, based on the poll numbers that we just saw, at least a third of you, if you're not already doing this, you will be soon. It's a brand new world. So I want to take the next few minutes to help you prepare for this new trend that's probably not going to be a trend. It's probably going to end up being longer term rather than shorter term. Something that's going to help you as you do your courtroom presentations on video, and also something that you can use to help your clients who eventually are going to be doing this same kind of appearance in a courtroom setting. So let's take a look first at where you should have your computer. You'll notice that I am looking almost directly into the computer. That's because I have actually elevated the computer up to a level where I can see the camera. So it's really important to get that camera and that computer, your laptop, whatever it is, up so that you're eye level with it. Let me just show you what I had to do in order to do that. I've got a shoebox, I've got a couple of books. I actually have a towel sitting on the table because hopefully that will muffle the sound a little bit. I'm in a fairly large room with a lot of high ceilings and quite a bit of hard surface around. So I wanted to muffle the sound. We'll talk a little bit more about audio in just a moment, but anything that you can do like this in order to get that computer up is going to be important. If you leave your computer where you often have it, which is sitting on your desk or on a table, your dining room table, probably if you're working from home, this is the view you get. See all those lights in the ceiling? That happens to be a chandelier that looks pretty bright. And it appears as if you're looking down at the people who are watching. I think it's probably not the greatest idea for you to appear as if you're looking down on the judge. I think that it's probably not a good idea for your clients to look as if they're looking down on the judge. So you want to get that computer up a little higher, and you also avoid what we call the dreaded up the nostrils view. It's not flattering for anybody, so move the camera up. One of the reasons that we want to do that is also because you want to be able to talk to the camera. It's easy to get distracted when you have something on the screen in front of you, especially if it's your own face. You have a tendency to look at the screen and talk to it, but that changes the eye contact if you're not looking at the computer camera. I know it seems funny to talk about eye contact when there's nobody else in the room for you to look at, but the eye contact comes through that camera. So you want to be sure that you are looking at the camera and only the camera as much as possible. Now that's a little hard to do because there are all these other distractions on the screen in front of you that you want to look at. First of all, get rid of as many of those distractions as you possibly can. If you can get rid of everything, if you don't need to see things in front of you, minimize them. That will help. If you have an external web camera that you can use, that also will help. It's a little larger. It will help you focus your attention on it more. But you can also do what I did, which is this. I simply got a couple of Post-it notes and drew some arrows, and I have them right now placed on either side of that tiny green dot on my laptop. So it helps me focus that attention. It helps me remember that this is what I'm supposed to be looking at instead of anything else. There's some really good reasons for that besides eye contact. If you can use a web camera, it's probably going to be better quality. It's going to focus a little better. It's also going to allow you to check your notes a little more simply if you have the camera up and you have your notes off to the side. Right now, I have notes just in a recipe holder that I got out of the kitchen, but they're on a table beside me and off to the side rather than sitting in front of me. If I were going down to my notes like this, you'd see the top of my head more than my eyes. Remember, eye contact is important whether you're on video or in person. So talk to that camera. Now we want to talk about the way for you to sit. You'll notice that you can see my shoulders, you can see my upper arms. I would call this kind of a bust statue shot. If you think about the way a bust statue looks, that's what you see. If you think about the way newscasters look, that's often the way they look too. You don't necessarily see their hands, but you see, excuse me, their shoulders and their upper arms. It makes it a little more appealing. It's the way we're used to looking at people. But so many times we think that we want to get a shot on the computer that looks similar to this. It's a little too close. I almost look like a floating head there. Also, when you're that close to the camera, the view is distorted. The focus is distorted. So back away a little bit. I know that we're in the era of social distancing right now. You don't have to be 6 feet away from the camera, certainly, but back off just a little bit. It's going to be more flattering. It's going to be a little more normal to look at, I guess. So think about the way you sit and the way you place the camera. You also want to set the scene behind you. You'll notice that I am far away, as I reasonably can be in this room, from the bookshelves behind me. I didn't want you to be able to get so close that you could read the titles on all of the books, because that would be distracting for you. I wanted to push away from it as far as possible. Whatever you have behind you, bookshelves, your desk, a gallery wall, whatever it is, try to stay as far away from it as possible so that you are the thing that is in sharp focus, not anything behind you that can be distracting. Speaking of distractions, I think we probably all have seen people who have a plant growing out of the back of their head or something else that looks really awkward. Check the shot. Look at it, ask a friend to take a look at it for you to make sure that everything looks the way it should. A friend of mine actually checked this shot for me when we were trying to set this up earlier this week and discovered that 2 vases that I had sitting on the mantle behind me made it look as if I had 2 big red earrings sticking out of each side of my head. So we got rid of those and that helped. Again, that would have been a distraction. So ask somebody to take a look at it for you and manipulate things just a little bit. Setting that scene will make a big difference. Now, if you have no choice other than to have a blank wall, this is probably what you're going to look like. I feel like I look like a mugshot there because I'm sitting very close to just a plain white wall. If that's all you have, that's all you have. You can't change that. But try to push away from the wall just a little bit. If you have some distance between you and the back of that plain white wall, then it's going to give you a little bit of dimension. The natural light is probably going to fall and form some shadows on the wall and just make it look a little better. If you can avoid this mugshot look, that would be great. So think about setting the scene. That's a really good idea. Now let's talk about lighting. This is often a challenge because we're not professionals. We don't know a lot about lighting. In general, you want to have more light facing you than behind you. Some of that light is going to come from the computer screen. That's where we get that glow sometimes, especially if the computer is looking up at you. But try to bring some light in from behind the computer and to the sides of the computer. If you have too much light behind you, it's going to look as if you have something like this. I look like I'm in the witness protection program, or I'm being interviewed on 60 Minutes and trying to hide my identity. So you don't want to have too much light behind you. You want more light in front of you. I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of video that looks like that, and I think it's a little scary. You especially don't want your clients to look like this. Shut the blinds, shut the curtains, shut the shutters, anything that you can to avoid that. Now let's talk about audio. Smaller spaces usually work better for audio. There's some work from home podcasters right now which are actually setting up makeshift studios inside their closets because it's a small space and it actually helps them baffle the sound because there's all that clothing hanging around them. That's what you want in an audio booth. Audio booths have foam on the walls to try to baffle the sound. That's the reason that I have that green towel sitting underneath my laptop right now to try to baffle the sound. But a smaller space is always going to work better. If you're forced to work and you're forced to present some kind of visual performance on your computer at your dining room table that has high ceilings and a lot of hard surfaces around you, see if you can turn around and point toward a corner or a smaller part of the room. You don't want that sound to echo too much. It sounds great in the shower when the sound is echoing, when we're singing all those songs, but it's not going to work as well for any kind of a webinar or webcast presentation. So think about changing the audio, changing the setup as best you can. Also, remember that everybody that you're speaking to is going to have a different computer, a different connection, a different internet connection, a different bandwidth. There's so many opportunities for distortions and delays that can really disrupt the audio. You can't control that. What you can do is a couple of things. First of all, if you're on a conference with a lot of people speaking, especially in a courtroom situation, try not to interrupt. The delay makes it hard to figure out when it's your turn to talk and when it's somebody else's turn to talk. If you try to interrupt, the audio is just going to get muddled and nobody's really going to know whose turn it is to speak next. Now, Mark's going to talk in a few minutes about how to handle objections in a hearing, because obviously you're interrupting during objections, and he has some ideas about how to handle that a little more gracefully in this kind of situation. But in general, try not to interrupt. Also, you want to think about the audio delays that are going to affect it. So try not to worry about those. I can tell right now actually that there's an audio delay, but just block that out as best you can and speak in what you think is the normal pattern and keep going rather than pausing for those audio delays. Takes a little bit of effort, but you'll get used to it after a while. Think about adjusting your chair. I'm sitting in a very straight chair right now. I guarantee that if you sit in a chair that rocks and swivels, you are going to rock and swivel too. And when you start to move, it's so much more obvious when you are only on a screen this big. When you're rocking back and forth like this, first of all, it's a little jarring, I think, to see. Also, it changes the audio whenever you move closer to the microphone on the computer and further away from it. You want that audio to stay as stable as possible. So find a comfortable but straight chair. You're going to want to think about adding more pauses in to your presentation, a few more opportunities for silence, and for everybody to take a little physical and mental breather. We're used to, in a courtroom setting, having the opportunity to shift in our chairs and move around, and it doesn't really matter. But because people aren't staring directly at you most of the time. But in this scenario, you need to think about all of those eyes that are on you and that they're able to see everything that you do. So find a stationary chair, sit up straight in it as best you can, and allow for pauses so people can shift. Speaking of pauses, they really help with your pace. If you think about speaking in only a few words at a time, a few sentences at a time, instead of long paragraphs, it's going to help. Again, those audio distortions can really make it difficult to follow along sometimes. So the more breaks you give people, the more pauses you give people to kind of catch up, it's going to be better. Now let's talk about the verbal communication skills that we all need to have. We're used to, in court, of having a lot more to work with when it comes to communication. We can see in general the whole body in court. Even if you're behind a podium, you can still see more of yourself than we see now. This is all we have in doing some kind of video presentation. So it's your face, your eyes, and your voice, plus a little bit of whatever visuals you're showing on the screen, as Mark mentioned. But your verbal communication skills become so much more important. You want to be clear, easy to understand, use words and phrases that have no question of misunderstanding. Be concise. Think about editing yourself. Use one word when one word is all that's necessary. Fewer words is always going to help. Shorter sentences, simple one-fact sentences are going to make a big difference. And finally, be conversational. Some of the best advice I ever got about speaking in public in any situation was from somebody who said, speak as if you're talking to your best friend, but take out the slang and the swear words. Now, that's probably a bit of an oversimplification for court, but simpler language is always going to be better. Now let's talk about minimizing those distractions. We're all working from home. It's a brand new environment. Everybody else in our households is surrounding us. The dogs are running in and out. People are putting popcorn in the microwave. Try whenever you are on some kind of a webinar, webcast, whatever you're doing that has video and audio with it, to get rid of as many of those distractions as possible. Turn off your phone, turn off the notifications on your computer. Tell people that they need to leave you alone for the next hour or hour and a half. I even went so far as to put a note downstairs on the apartment buzzer. If you're like me, you are probably getting a lot of deliveries right now as we're trying to avoid going out, especially here in New York City. So the buzzer is ringing a lot during the day. I didn't want to be disturbed because I knew that would be distracting to me, and I knew that that buzzer would be distracting to you. So anything that you can do to minimize those distractions is going to help. And finally, I cannot stress this enough, test, test, test. I already mentioned the different computers, the different internet connections, the different bandwidths. There are so many variables out there that it is going to save you so much time and so much anxiety if you can spend 5 minutes, the very beginning, spend that 5 minutes just testing everything, making sure it all works, test it yourself, look at the background, Think about how this is going to make the best presentation. If you have clients who are going to be appearing on video in a courtroom situation at some point, test everything with them. Share these tips with them. A lot of this is common sense when you think about it, but because we're not used to being on video every day like we're going to be perhaps in the future, it's just a little new. That's why I wanted to give you some of these tips and share some things that I learned over 30 years in television and that I've been able to learn as I've trained advocates over the last several years. So now Mark has some ways that you can actually take some of these tips and put them into practice when you are in court, even though you're not in the courtroom. Mark?
Thank you, Carol. Working with court and counsel. So let's imagine what is going to happen within the next few weeks or the next few months. There's going to be a backlog. Right now, most cases have been continued. The only things that are being heard are the emergency matters, emergency orders of protection, felony arraignments. But there will be a backlog as everything works through the system. And how are we going to handle the backlog? The judges will have hundreds of cases that they have to sort out. In addition, there will be an increase in some areas, a dramatic increase. I was on a conference call the other day where they expect in bankruptcy court, it will double their workload. But the first thing that I want you to ask yourself with regard to video hearings and video trials is this best for your client? And do you need absolutely you and your client to be there in person? And the only reason I bring this up is because in one fairly narrow area, and that would be criminal sentencing, I think you need to ask yourself the question, am I doing my client a favor by doing it over video, or does this person need to be in person before sentencing? The reason I bring this up is I was doing some research before we were going to go online with this program about all the countries that do a lot of video hearings and video sentencings. And the UK is ahead of us. And I was in an email exchange with a colleague of mine over there. And he told me that nearly 6,000 prisoners are awaiting sentencing, and most of them will be done by video. I then related to him a study that I read in the UK back in 2010. I didn't read it back in 2010. I just read it recently, that there was a statistical significance when they first started video sentencing between video sentencing and in-person sentencing. And there was a statistically significant difference in the length of sentence, depending on whether the person was on video or in person. And when they were in person, the sentences were for a lesser amount of time, or they were to probation as opposed to prison. My colleague over in the UK said he was aware of the study, that he would direct me to the fact that it was many years ago, and that they have been doing video sentencing for nearly 6 years now. And most of his sentences are by video. However, if we're going to have to do video sentencing, I think you need to be aware of, are there some cases where you're going to say to the judge, I really want you to sentence this person in person due to certain aspects of the person's personality. Now, some of the UK attorneys said they preferred video sentencing because they really didn't want their client sitting there in front of the judge. They preferred to have their client there on video. But some said they wanted their client there in person because it made the pleas in mitigation or the statement in allocution better if they did it in person. So let's say you're in front of a judge who wants to do video sentencing, who won't take your offer to extend the hearing so that you can do an in-person sentencing, maybe a month or two from now on, from this point on. Studies have shown that if you make a person aware of the bias tends to disappear. This is why we do implicit bias training. When we're trained in it, the bias tends to dissipate. So I would suggest that you say to the judge, Your Honor, we have not done video sentencings in this court before, and my concern is that I would like my client to be in person in front of you. I understand that that is not a possibility. But in the countries that have done video sentencing, there was a difference between those who were sentenced by video and those who were sentenced in person. And the difference was that if it was an in-person sentencing, the sentencing was less. Perhaps merely mentioning that to the court will make the court aware and discount that bias, or at least put in the judge's back of their mind the bias that they may come up with, or the bias that they may have, doing it through video as opposed to in person. So for that narrow area, or perhaps in the civil realm, do you need it in person? I know if your client is in custody, you probably want the sentencing soon if you have a hope for probation. But quite frankly, if they're going to be in custody anyway and getting day-for-day credit, and you want them in person for their statement of allocution, you might ask the judge if you can wait. And hopefully, it will only be a short period of time before we're actually back in court. So let's say we are doing this by video. Think about stipulations for remote hearings or trials. And the stipulations that I'm thinking of are time and the number of witnesses. At the Civil Jury Project, we've analyzed the effect of time trials. And at first, attorneys do not like having time limits on trials, but afterwards, their report is they like the time trials. It made them more efficient in their presentation. And with the backlog that is going to have to be handled in the court system, judges would appreciate stipulations on length of argument, length of hearing, and perhaps number of witnesses. Next, what is the record? Now, in the next few weeks, we're probably going to have to be scrambling as to what is a record. Probably the court reporters will not be reporting to the courthouses, even though it's just the judge and the court reporter, to take an official transcript. Do you have the option of electronic recording, or can you offer something to the court, such as the platform that you're using? Will it record? Can you help the court make a record? Now, I want to set this up because I know you're all reading this and you're thinking waiver, reconsideration, or appeal based upon tech differences or problems. I'm not talking about tech differences or problems that go to the heart of the matter. Of course, you're going to get a rehearing if the judge can't hear or can't see. I'm talking about the difference in quality in your presentations. So you have all tuned in for this. You have heard what Carol has told you about how to present yourself well on camera. You have taken the time and effort to do what is necessary in order to present yourself well and your client well, or maybe your witnesses well on camera. And let's say the other side has not done that the other side thinks that they can just take the laptop off the couch, pop it on the kitchen table, open it up, and advocate. Let's say a dog walks through the background and they want a rehearing on that. Or one of their colleagues pops in the door while they're arguing to you and saying, "Hey, Charlie, it's time for coffee." "Oh, sorry," and leaves. What I'm talking about is saying to the court at the very beginning, "Your Honor, we're willing to stipulate that other than major technological difficulties where you can't hear or see what we're doing, that we agree to waive any request for rehearing or reconsideration based on minor technical difficulties." Now, the other side may not agree to that, but at least you're planning in the judge's mind that you have done everything you can to be an effective advocate through the computer. So if the other side has something like that happen and decides, "Oh my gosh, I have to get a rehearing or reconsideration," the judge can say, "No, the other side asked for a stipulation on this. I'm not going to grant it." So think about waiving anything that would be form as opposed to substance. I would urge you to put the objections at the end. If I was back on the bench and had to hear a hearing or an arraignment or a bond setting, I would like to hear it in an orderly fashion. I would like to hear both sides' position. So I don't think there's any downside to doing the objections over video like you normally do in a deposition, that all objections are preserved to the end. And in depositions, we say as to form. I would urge in the video hearings, you save all the objections to the end. There's absolutely no downside, and it will help you communicate better with the court. How can I help the court? The best thing you can do is ask yourself the question, if I were the judge, what would I want to decide this case? You ask yourself, where is the judge? The judge may be at their home. They may not have access to online legal resources. They might not have access to the court-reported administrative assistants or law clerks. So how can we help the court? I would suggest written submissions before hearings to give the judge the view from 30,000 feet. Agree to no interruptions or objections while someone else is talking. And you take the lead on that. If they interrupt you, just stop, let them finish the interruption. Your Honor, I'd like to finish my argument without interruption. I'll be glad to handle counsel's objection at the end as we agreed. And you handle it elegantly and finish your point. Save the case sites for written submissions. The case sites just slow your argument down. You can give them the name of the case, but that is either for the written submission that you do at the beginning or send to the judge before the hearing, of course, with copy to opposing counsel, or the written submission that I'm going to talk about at the end. Supplemental written submission after hearing. If the judge has questions, offer to submit in writing a response to those questions. And let me urge you all that perhaps the supplemental written submission after the hearing be the actual order. When I was in my first stint as being a trial lawyer, towards the end of my career, I wrote the order for the judge. I would say, Judge, this is our position in the case. I'm sending you a copy of the order that we would ask that you enter. There are findings of fact. There is the cite to the case law. We've supplied a copy to opposing counsel, and your Honor can, of course, change it as your Honor sees fit, but this will be a starting point, or it could be a template that the court could use. I found many times the court simply signed my order or did several variations of the order and send it out. The more you can help the judge do his or her work, the better. Can I do anything to help the record? I don't think I can advise you of anything better than what Carol said, to be clear and concise. Less is more, and if you can make it visual, that helps us decide cases. So let's go to persuasion over the internet in general. Brainstorm any visual that may help. As Carol talked about, we don't have as many tools that we can use when we're sitting in front of the computer screen. So what are the visual tools that we can send to the judge, either in a written submission, or perhaps you can build some graphics into the presentation like we're doing today. Things like timelines. I don't believe you can adequately try a case unless you've constructed a timeline. At first, it will be one thing right after another, and then you must take that timeline and put it on an actual calendar. Only by putting it on an actual calendar does the case become alive. You see not only what happened on what day, but you also see what didn't happen on the other days. Sometimes the gaps in time are more important than the events in time. And it also allows you to put it in the context of that year. You see something happened at 6 o'clock, or they're claiming that something happened at 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And you look and you see that fell on a Friday right before a 3-day holiday. and you ask yourself, would that have actually happened? Would that person have been in the office? So make a timeline, and if you think it will be helpful, send it to the court. Cast of characters, especially for those of you who do litigation with many witnesses. Give us the cast of characters, the people on each side of the case. So we have their names in front of us, what they do for those particular companies or clients, and which side of the case they're on. And any maps, charts, or diagrams that will assist. The verbal description of street scenes can be deadly. I don't know how many times when I was a judge that we'd have a police officer saying, yes, I was at the northeast corner of 5th and Vermont, and 5th, of course, is 4 lanes running north-south, and Vermont is 2 lanes running east-west, and the red Chevrolet was on the northernmost bound lane on the west side of, and you're going, my kingdom for a map, my kingdom for a map. So help us out. Give us any map or any diagram. We want to arrive at the correct decision primarily, but if we can do it in the shortest period of time, that's an additional benefit for everyone and for you. So think about how you can make your case come alive visually. Use the tools you already have, and I'll go through these: headlining, numbering, and finally ask for questions. Let's talk about headlining and numbering. Carol talked about being clear and concise. We process numbers in a different part of our brain than we process words. So it excites a different area of the brain when we hear numbers. So you may want to headline your argument. Your Honor, thank you for hearing us today. I have 3 points to make to the court, and I will address them in this order. First of all, you know our position in the case. Second, I'm going to give you the cases that are cited by the other side against us, and there are 2 other cases, and I'm going to distinguish them. And third, we're going to give you the cases that are in our favor. So turning to the first point, you can guarantee that I'm going to be sitting there, or the judge you're trying in front of is going to be sitting there and when you say you've got 3 points, we'll write the 3 points down. We'll write that you have 3 cases. It will provide an orderly method for the judge to go through it. So headline, and especially if we start doing witness examinations on video, headline is even more important. Mr. Morton, I'm going to take you to the corner of 5th and Vermont about 2:30 in the afternoon. What were you doing there? So we take the trier effect, the judge, or if we do a virtual trial, a jury, by headlining the people and orienting them as to the next topic. And finally, ask for questions. Your Honor, do you have any questions? Your Honor, is there anything that we can provide that will help you decide this decision? And Your Honor, we are going to send you a draft opinion incorporating the findings of fact that we ask you to find, the case law that we've cited. You, of course, can change it, but we're offering it to you. We're sending it to opposing counsel as an aid to the court.